Matcha, Capital World of House Finnegan, Council Room. The prince had to keep a groan from escaping his throat as he listened to the endless bickering, head-butting arguments and posturing his chosen counselors were so fond of engaging at any moment. Next to him sat Amelia Finnegan, wearing an exotic dress that showcased her power and elegance. Her sand-colored skin paired nicely with the light pink dress as jewelry adorned her neck, ears, and head. Her long hair, dark as obsidian and usually allowed to fly freely, was braided and resting from her left shoulder. Her face was partially covered by a lush, gem-decorated, only allowing her golden-colored eyes to be seen unobstructed. As always, the Marchioness showed her skill and composure by pretending to be unbothered by the continued arguing that promised to devolve into a shouting match if left unchecked. The prince knew that only his presence, dutifully guarded by 6 present Royal Marines and Commander Juliana Winfield sitting at his right, prevented the gathered men and women from blowing up against each other.
"They bark like angry pups, angry that their toys were taken away,"
Juliana muttered, only loud enough for him to hear. The prince agreed silently with her observation. Unlike Amelia, Juliana wasn't known for her keen, careful approach to things. She was an unrelenting hammer that would either make or break whatever she set her mind upon. Suddenly, William Hemstroke slammed his hands on the large table as he stood up. "You're out of line, Taravis.
What you propose is borderline insanity," he argued angrily.
The bald Vivian Taravis snorted back as other minor arguments died down around her. "You say insanity. I say reasonable. Duke Draymore has managed to set blockades around entire systems. Worse, he has paralyzed several territories simultaneously, robbing us of precious and deadly reinforcements. His forces may hold an edge over us, but their numbers aren't infinite, and his resources must be stretched thin. We must act and take the initiative by setting blockades of our own and capturing their supply ships and stations. I may not have the broad scope of the logistical division, but neither am I a brute," William countered, eyes narrowed. "One mistake, and that traitor would have an excuse to escalate this conflict with the moral high ground in his favor. And then what? We move against him again, relying on more dangerous measures that skirt the laws. Suddenly a civil war will erupt." He sighed deeply, pointing an accusatory finger at the woman. "I will not partake in your flawed and one-sided travesty of a battle plan, Taravis." "I share William's worries, Vivian. However, I also see the merit and value in your proposal," Hannah Talaro said, crossing her arms. "We're too cautious," the veteran George Lintar said. "We must act. Our forces are growing steadily. Our liege's rousing presence moved many loyal sons and daughters of the Principality. Despite the hurdle that transmission caused, we are steadily growing in number, are we not? Even the positions left vacant by commoner deserters are being filled by those who know their place." His gaze fell upon the prince, and his tone became supplicant and suggestive. Perhaps if His Majesty could allow an emergency conscription of useful commoners to be carried out? "I forbid such actions to be taken," the prince replied as he frowned slightly. He couldn't allow his entire frustration to show, but he had to be clear on the matter. "I will not take a step that my uncle, Duke Draymore, is unwilling to take himself. He wants to force my hand into breaking our laws while he continues to have a clear advantage in this conflict. I will not give such a pleasure," he proclaimed firmly and full of conviction. "Duke Draymore is a brilliant man, we all know this, but his hand is limited. Every action he's taking in preparation and in the execution of his coup has played within acceptable norms." He paused for a moment to look into the eyes of every member present. All 36 high-ranking officers and other influential nobles, including Amelia Finnegan. Several commanders were present as advisors and admirals, including Admiral Joaquin Finnegan and the recently promoted Admiral Vashakati Reed. The Council of Nobles yet lives even if they are held captive. Half of my siblings are also his prisoners, alive and safe. "A traitor he may be, but not a monster," the prince stated. "I've no doubt that he intends to weaken my standing and claim to the throne, and by doing so, he may strengthen his position while painting me as incompetent, fearful, and weak. Victory can be his in a varied number of ways, but as long as we don't lose our objectives, shirk our honor, and move with precision, Duke Draymore won't be able to play any moves that we're not willing to make ourselves." "You speak with wisdom beyond your years, Your Majesty," Amelia praised with calm, collected poise. "I assure you, House Finnegan will support your rightful claim to the throne, my prince. We may not be able to conscript forces, but my house is blessed with riches, technology, and resources to spare. Incentives have been offered across our main colonies and station, mercenaries have been contacted, and the sanctity of the academies is being respected. Many are coming. Many more will come. What we lack are proper warships, Joaquin continued. With the bulk of our forces either pinned down or scattered, we must rely on the vessels provided by loyalist houses and whose we can acquire through purchases. Captured vessels have also proven to be a viable tactic. However, void combat has been severely reduced shortly after your resurface, my liege. We still see conflict, nothing more than skirmishes and low-intensity battles, but all forces are more preoccupied with maintaining their positions, blockades, and expend efforts in wasting time. No doubt Duke Cornelius is consolidating forces and will attempt to strike at you at some point, my liege, Vashakati commented, and almost every other naval officer present agreed with him. We must be ready to face his forces when the time comes. In the meantime, we must continue our efforts to find the scoundrel responsible for that blatant defamation, George continued as his gaze shifted to Lukacs Ishtal. Lukacs glared silently at the older man before clearing his throat. My agents and I have done everything within our capabilities to purge the network with little success. There have been half a dozen more pieces of propaganda circulating local networks and the Principality's wide network. We've done countermeasures, creating our own pieces of propaganda and more. But whoever is responsible for that video and the subsequent attempts at subversion is unknown to me. All I can confirm is that we're dealing with a supremely talented agent at the very least. There are no tracks for me to follow, no weaknesses I can exploit. Excuses, nothing more. What can we expect from the man hailing from a traitor house? Rear Admiral Moreton Banta questioned with barely disguised disdain. And this comes from a member of a house too afraid to proclaim their loyalty and instead take the coward's route by declaring neutrality? A voice called out, which broke the tentative calm that had dawned on the chambers, only to dissolve into chaos once more. The prince had listened carefully until the breaking point. Frustrated, he turned to Juliana and gave her a single nod. "Enough!" Juliana shouted, her voice booming in the chamber and making more than half of the present wince at her absurd volume. Your petty discussions can wait for another time. Our prince requires your attention and commands your silence. Everyone obeyed her command, even if some did so reluctantly. My prince. Thank you, Juliana, the prince said, and then stood up. Everyone tensed for a moment. My loyal subjects, I do not question the loyalty of anyone present here. If I had doubts, you wouldn't be before me today. Bickering amongst each other yields no favorable results for anyone but my uncle. Each moment we waste, each curse and pointed finger that's raised benefits the traitors and slows our progress. He raised a hand to his chest, clenching it into a fist. We will move into the offensive, but we can't do so carelessly. And we will not act like ancient tyrants who pressed their own population without remorse, consideration, or contemplation. Nobles lead and commoners obey. Let us be a shining beacon instead of a marred visage of shame and dishonor. He finished his speech with a firm tone before retaking his seat. With a hand gesture, the screens came to life, catching everyone's attention. 2 days ago, I received an extensive and detailed report from my sister, Princess Clara. The prince paused for a moment for dramatic effect and to allow his admirals, commanders, and nobles present to ready themselves for what he was about to reveal. I dispatched her with the mission of gaining the support of House Ferentis. Sadly, a delegation sent by my uncle was already present. Count Ferentis welcomed her with open arms and cordiality. On the screens appeared the profiles of Felicity Sintor, Casimir Kasten, Javier Wunder, and Maximilian Userek. It was the last one that drew several worried murmurs. The prince allowed them to continue for a few seconds before continuing. The negotiations took place and were quickly resolved. Felicity Sintor, acting as the leader of her delegation and forces, managed to outmaneuver my sister's attempts and reach a trade and exclusivity agreement with House Ferentis in regard to their agricultural and food processing capabilities. Forgive me for my interruption, my prince, but have those cowards sided with your treacherous uncle? Asked Vashakati. The prince shook his head. House Ferentis maintains their neutrality on this conflict, as they have done so many times in their long history, he answered, and a wave of mixed feelings was visible on the faces of many. He could understand their relief and worry equally. The official support of one great house was significant from the political angle, one he was glad his uncle failed to obtain, even if that meant he wouldn't get it either. Furthermore, the loss of their foodstuffs would be impactful in the long term, at least on paper. With determination, he continued. Fortunately for us, Count Geenock shared with my sister a most dire situation he and his house were facing. Numerous Drazen, pirate, and rebel incursions were happening across his territory prior to the start of the coup. These incursions escalated in intensity until they suddenly stopped as more and more Drazen raiding fleets were detected entering the fallen system of Hastrung. Count Geenock feared the Drazen were gathering forces for a large-scale assault, possibly the start of a scarlet harvest. Then we must muster forces to strike at them before they strike, my liege, Admiral Damian Valto proposed immediately. My prince, give me the order and I shall cleanse their infestation personally. With what forces to spare? Joaquin countered, though not with malice or envy. The traitors outnumber us 3-1 to our best estimates. We're barely able to maintain the stalemate as we consolidate our forces and wait for their inevitable assaults. The Drazen may be a threat, but they will be dealt with after Duke Draymore is stopped. The loss of life will be lamentable, but I agree with Admiral Joaquin. We don't have the strength to destroy those carrion feeders presently, William Hempstroke added. Your devotion and dedication is to be commended, Admiral Damian. However, that will not be necessary, the prince confessed, confusing everyone but Amelia, Juliana, and Lukacs. The screens shifted again, now showcasing a tactical display of the Hastrung system. Once my sister heard Count Geenock's tale and how Duke Draymore denied his protection unless he bent the knee and supported his claim, she was able to form a new agreement with him. He paused for a moment only to share a quick glance with Amelia.
Our beloved princess,
Amelia took over, closing the fan to reveal her freckled cheeks,
vowed to liberate Hastrung from the control of rebel, pirate, and Drazen forces and return it under the control of House Ferentis.
In exchange, House Ferentis would grant us full access to their shipyards, manufacturing facilities, and material resources for the duration of this conflict. Princess Clara, in a display of magnanimity, didn't pressure Count Geenock to bend the knee. She's respected their stance and sovereignty to remain neutral. Before any protests could emerge from the exchange of glances and hushed murmurs, the prince continued. The fears of Count Geenock Ferentis were correct. My sister was able to enter the system undetected, thanks to the intervention of a talented Ikanti technician. On the screens, several red points appeared, indicating the Drazen ships and several points of interest, such as the debris fields where stations were once found and the lightly damaged shipyard. Finally, a purple dot representing the Nor Navio appeared at the edge of the system from its topside perspective. As you can see, there are signs of battle already present in the system. Thanks to the information gathered later by my sister Cynthia Winfield, it was confirmed that the Drazen, the rebels of Hago, and a large pirate group called Sons of Darkness had formed a tense alliance with their own goals in mind, Juliana explained, carrying on. Their assault on Gintrax was intended to be an opening strike to set their plans in motion. Fortunately, they were stopped right then, for this defeat marked the rupture of their alliance, and the Drazen, led by a Lord Harrower, betrayed their once allies to claim the Hastrung system for themselves. "Honorless beasts!" George Lintar proclaimed, followed by cries of approval. With the element of surprise on their side, my sister decided to take action. She authorized Commander Redford Kalen to engage freely. The prince paused as the time-lapse on the screens accelerated until the Noir Navio deployed its fighters while moving at the same time to a debris field. The Drazen responded in kind, sending a destroyer and 2 frigates to investigate detonations caused by probes sacrificed by Redford. The Drazen presence in the system consisted of 2 damaged destroyer-class ships, 1 damaged cruiser-class, 8 operational destroyer-class and 2 cruisers-class, 8 frigates, and a cattle ship named the Eternal Garden.
"In the name of Julius, a cattle ship?" Vashakati murmured, astonished.
"My prince, if I may be so bold to ask, where are the Ferentis reinforcements?" Surely this can't be right. Redford Kalen, the Vorpal Strike, chose to engage whilst so disgustingly outnumbered and outgunned? "He did," the prince answered without hesitation. "All of you know of Wyatt Staples, my knight banneret, and his achievements ever since rescuing my sister. I won't bore you with the details, but after his unprecedented victory over ZTK 990, Redford Kalen adopted certain tactics and employed them during this battle. The first one is as you'll see." The screens suddenly lit up with hundreds of smaller signals approaching the cattle ship. On a combined timed assault, Redford Kalen and his fighter wing, led by his second-in-command, Wyatt Staples, struck against the Drazen simultaneously. With the use of what he named Staplian Assault, a barrage of missiles carrying tactical mines broke through the shields of the cattle ship, which was followed by another barrage of missiles carrying haywire mines to disable it. At the same time, the fighter wing completely disabled the shipyard and the stationed ships, destroying one of them. Redford quickly destroyed those two frigates and the destroyer in a quick decapitating assault. On the screens, the movements were executed to match his words, quickly replaying the battle before everyone's eyes. The Drazen were quick to respond by sending 4 frigates and 406 fighters after Lieutenant Wyatt's wing. They chased after them with murderous intent. This is the result of that conflict, he said, knowing that most present expected to see a total carnage. Internally, he smiled. The battle had been a carnage, but not inflicted upon Wyatt's forces. The screen shifted again, showing the footage from Wyatt's fighter combined with tactical data of what happened. They listened to his speech and his plan and bore witness to the execution of it all, resulting in the destruction of the majority of the Drazen fighters chasing them, forcing them to rout. They also witnessed the rescue of the wounded pilots, his slightly modified outburst, and the subsequent result of his unexpected victory. The prince scanned the room, finding his admirals, generals, and noble representatives were speechless. With just cause. He'd be no better than they were the first time he saw it all. I can't wait to see their expressions when they see what he did on the gallant venture, the prince thought to himself, then quickly lamented himself mentally. Have I picked up Clara's twisted fascination with seeing people's expressions for my own amusement? How? George Lintar was the first to find his voice as a shaky fist trembled on the table's surface. How? He had to be commanded by Redford. There is no other explanation. At that moment in time, and right after the cattle ship was disabled, Juliana began, the Drazen activated their jammers. Our fighter wing was cut off from the Nor Navio. What you've seen here is what Lieutenant Wyatt Staples was able to achieve with his own initiative. 357 Drazen fighters were destroyed, with only 12 lost fighters and 8 lost lives. And before any of you make remarks about his outburst, over a dozen pilots defiled complaints but later retracted them. You'll see why soon. The prince smiled internally when he caught a glimpse of nearly everyone slightly straightening themselves after Juliana's chilly delivery. The Drazen, now acutely aware of an unseen enemy, formed around their cattle ship except for 2 destroyers on patrol. Why was the case? Simple. Felicity Centaur was able to deduce my sister's destination and decided to wait until she could jump into the system and attack the Nor Navio with the express intent of killing her within Hastrung. As such, the Drazen expected further reinforcements to arrive. They would not lose their cattle ship without a fight. Redford was more than willing to end them before giving them a chance. The screens shifted to a tactical display once again, but with fragmented camera shots taken from the Nor Navio itself. The prince said nothing as he allowed the battle to unfold. Predictably, eyes widened and mouths went agape from the initial strike up until victory was seemingly achieved, only for the horde of fighters, bombers, and gunships to surge from the cattle ship. Time moved forward in the blink of an eye, revealing the mining drones dragging out an antimatter torpedo, only to then haul it forth. Everyone, including him, marveled at the sight of the flower death blossom, as Clara called it. The Nor Navio had been mauled, but victory had been achieved. Felicity's fleet, a group consisting of 5 Corvette-class ships and a light destroyer, the Gallant Venture, entered the system after the jamming began, the prince said, and 6 green dots appeared on the map. The 2 Drazen destroyers broke off their return part to face them. It resulted in the destruction of one of their destroyers and the loss of 2 trader corvettes. Meanwhile, our forces were inside the cattle ship, the Eternal Garden, with the intent of capturing it. Most of their military forces were planet-side, so the capture was successful after several hours of fighting with minimal losses. Felicity's fleet pressed on, and Casimir Caiston issued a surrender order, the prince said, allowing the recording to play. Hearing it again made him angry, but it also filled him with amusement, given what it caused. They unleashed their fighters led by Maximilian the Roaring Thunder Usurek, House Centaur's lone wolf. But Commander Redford and Lieutenant Wyatt prepared their traps with deadly precision. Again, making use of the lieutenant's displayed skills, Redford made use of damaged, unmanned fighters for suicide runs. Haywire mines crippled Felicity's fleet while their fighters engaged our own. The footage displayed the engagement with the traitor fighters, culminating with the defeat of Maximilian Userek after the apparent death of Wyatt Staples and the ultimate victory over the traitor fighter forces. "Wyatt Staples didn't die," the prince exclaimed. He ejected from his cockpit as part of his plan. He knew he had no chance against a lone wolf on his own, so he lured him into a trap where the rest of his squadron, the composters, could disable his fighter and claim his life. Make no mistake, they had the intention to kill him. Yet the Roaring Thunder survived, though not unscathed. He is currently a welcomed guest aboard the Noir Navio. Now refrain yourselves from speaking. What you are about to witness is the truth. The prince took a deep breath. After Maximilian was defeated, my knight banneret was carried by one of his squad mates onto the gallant venture. Due to the actions of Javier Wunder, a breakout mutiny occurred aboard the ship prior to Wyatt's arrival. Crippled, with internal systems going haywire, and with chaos reigning, Wyatt Staples boarded the gallant venture on his own with the goal of capturing Felicity Cintor, Casimir Caiston, and Javier Wunder as his primary target. Javier Wunder escaped and is roaming Hago. He will be found, killed, or forgotten. It matters not. Our forces will make no effort to recover him or his followers. The screens shifted again, playing out the footage Milcades had worked on from the start all the way to the bloody finish. Internally, he cursed his sister as he had to put more effort than usual into keeping his composure and not surrender to the temptation of smirking at the ever-shifting expressions of those present. Amelia had seen the footage already, but she couldn't completely hide the unease in her eyes. Juliana didn't care at all about keeping her composure as she smiled a sadistic but proud smile. Behind him, he could practically feel the approval radiating from his Royal Marines. After capturing the gallant venture and the unconditional surrender of their remaining fleet, my sister arranged a meeting with Hago's inhabitants, destroying the main stronghold of the Drazen, and formalized a pact between the inhabitants of Hago and House Ferentis. Count Genac's third son, Count Istanel Ferentis, was present throughout these events to bear witness to them as they unfolded. My sister contacted me shortly before this reunion started, and I will contact her once it is concluded. Silently, Juliana handed him a datapad. Holding it high, the prince continued. In here I have my official proclamations issuing the rewards earned through blood, sacrifice, and ingenuity. Firstly, a medal shall be forged to commemorate the Hastrung campaign, a unique mark of glory, honor, respect, and recognition to all those serving in the Noir Navio. Nobles, commoners, mercenaries, and after much consideration, even the Yakanti. Does anyone argue against the gravity of the monumental victory that was achieved? Nobles exchanged glances for several seconds until Hannah Talaro spoke up. My prince, I dare not question your judgment, but why would you extend such a reward to aliens? One among them was instrumental in their victory, and the remaining 7 have served well under my sister's command. Aliens they may be, but I've deemed them worthy of recognition. And not only them, for my sister has also, in her wisdom, extended a hand of mercy to young pirates, nothing more than mere children and adolescents. They proved their worth in the battle by rescuing several other crew members. "Pardoned pirates!" one noble exclaimed. "Your Majesty, that is absurdity!" "Children and young teenagers!" the prince repeated himself in a harder, heavier tone. My sister has explained to me that this is an experiment of hers. Pirates and other similar organizations have always been a thorn in the Principality's side. A blemish to be purged, but there are always more despite our best efforts. She wishes to extend a hand to those who may be redeemable, not all of them. His answer didn't convince many, but it didn't have to. He just needed them to shut up. If he labeled her intentions as a mere experiment, then all would be at least willing to wait and see further results. Not that it would matter, as none would remember the pardoned pirates after his following proclamation. Secondly, a series of commendations, medals of service, and brands of loyalty shall be issued to those who've earned it. Finally, I've approved a number of promotions and special rewards. Above all, 2 stand out. Commander Redford Kalen shall receive a symbolic promotion to the rank of Admiral for his valiant actions and impeccable strategic and tactical acumen against insurmountable odds. The prince inhaled deeply, knowing precisely what was about to unfold. For his numerous contributions inside and outside the battlefield, outstanding valor, unfaltering loyalty, tactical exploits, and courageous service, I hereby recognize that Lieutenant Wyatt Staples is to be promoted to the rank of captain, and, in addition, he shall be elevated to the noble rank of castellan. I object. George Lintar was, as expected, the first one to react. The old man was sweating as indignation threatened to turn his face into a permanent shade of red. "My prince, that man is unfitting." "I concur. Hear, hear!" "Preposterous!" Angry voices cried out in protest, while only a scant few remained neutral, but none spoke in support of his decision. Juliana moved to stand up, but with a gesture of his hand she stopped and remained seated. The prince would allow them to speak and say their piece before stepping in again. In his mind he moved a night piece, devouring a carelessly exposed bishop. After 2 minutes of shouting, he raised his right palm, soliciting silence. Juliana wasn't needed as his noble advisors and officers grew silent within moments. "I've heard your voices of disapproval and none of support. What are your genuine grievances with my decision?" the prince asked in a soft tone. "My prince," William Hempstroke began, stopping his older comrade from overstepping again. "I was amongst those who saw Lieutenant Wyatt Staples after you rewarded him so generously before, granting him the rank of lieutenant unilaterally. Such special cases have happened in the past, but they are numbered. Shortly after that, you elevated him to the rank of Knight Banneret, an already most prestigious position for a mere commoner." William felt his scar burn with nervousness as he carefully tailored his next words. "It has been but scant months since those events, my liege. Many would confuse such well-earned rewards with favoritism," the red-haired man finished, offering a cordial head bow. "Would any of you say the same if a family member of your house achieved such great accomplishments?" Juliana protested. "We are nobles," William replied. "That's the difference, Juliana. Wyatt Staples has not received training, education, or formal instruction whatsoever. He is but from commoner stock. Not anymore. He is a noble now," Juliana countered. "Indirectly, he offered a new viable tactic to be used. Two, in fact, if Redford's example is to be followed, learned from and imitated," the prince continued. "Those who perform their duty with exemplary actions shall be recognized. It is not favoritism. It is an adequate reward, a measured and tamed one at that. If I were to act on my own accord, I'd make a rear admiral out of him and elevate him to a count. I believe he has done far more in a single engagement than most will achieve in their careers. My prince, please be reasonable. He is but an uncultured fool, a washed swine at best, and a snake coiling around Her Majesty's neck. We do not know what he wants or how far his ambitions run. He has demonstrated deadly force, and by his own admission, he has a dim view of everything we cherish: loyalty, honor, glory, and reputation. We implore you to reconsider," George pleaded as fellow officers both from the Army and the Navy agreed with him with quiet murmurs and nodding heads. The prince leaned forth. "If that's what you believe, then I welcome you to challenge him to a duel of honor. Let him prove his worth to you in person, to all of you. I'm certain he'll be more than pleased to accept any and all duels issued," he offered with a gentle tone, but none matched his gaze. With a deep sigh, several moments later, the prince crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes in apparent deep thought. A few moments later, Amelia Finnegan cleared her throat and fanned herself a few times, gaining his attention. "My prince, if I may?" "I believe I have a solution to this dilemma," the prince nodded. "Exceptional service is to be rewarded, this is true, but perhaps a more tempered reward is to be considered." Her words rang loud as everyone's attention was placed on her. "None can deny that the good Marquis Redford Calen and Knight Banneret Wyatt Staples deserve to be recognized. That would be most impudent and, dare I say, insulting to even consider denying any of their achievements. I doubt any among us object against the reward given to our dear Marquis." She paused for a moment to fan herself again, only to abruptly close it. "An elevation in the ranks of our nobility shouldn't be given so frugally, less so for those who have achieved one recently. Lieutenant Wyatt's accomplishments are extraordinary, however. Exceptional. In due reason, exceptional rewards are to be issued within reason. My prince, instead of a castellan, I believe the rank of baron shall suffice." Commander William spoke truthfully. "Talented in combat and carnage your Knight Banneret may be, but he lacks education in all fields." She paused again, quickly eyeing the rest of the present officers and selected nobles. "Now, I may not be part of the Royal Navy itself, but my dear brother Joaquin is. Tell me, dearest brother of mine, what do you believe is an appropriate increase in rank for the lieutenant to receive?" Joaquin cleared his throat and passed his fingers over his mustache before replying. "Given everything we've witnessed and heard, I believe he's not ready for true command. However, he shouldn't go unrewarded," he said with some difficulty. "I, personally, would grant him the rank of Lieutenant Commodore," he said. and tentative murmurs of agreement followed. The prince stood up. "Does anyone object to the proposal issued by Marchioness Amelia Finnegan?" Gazes were exchanged, and some murmurs floated about, but in the end, none spoke up. "The prince has heard your protests. I hereby recognize the elevation of Knight Banneret Wyatt Staples to the rank of Baron, granting him the right to formally establish his house within the first generation, with him as the head and the right to own land and industry. I hereby recognize the increase in rank from lieutenant to lieutenant commodore." He couldn't help himself this time. He allowed himself a small, triumphant smile to grace his lips. "Loyalty is its own reward. And by Julius I shall make it so," the prince thought, more determined than ever. Nor Navio, ceremony room. Wyatt stood at the front row of his column alongside the rest of his squad mates. Jincho was also present next to him, but he looked beyond bored if he read him right. And he had to agree with the usually chaotic Ikanti. He'd never been present at an award and promotion ceremony before. The closest thing was the short speech by an instructor when he graduated from the academy. By Julius's name, it was boring. "This is worse than my days piloting a hauler." "I never thought something could be more boring than that," Wyatt thought to himself, suppressing the urge to yawn as Redford pinned a medal on a proud Marine's uniform. Behind him, Clara and Cynthia sat with impassive expressions, and sure those were perfectly carved masks to hide a boredom that matched his own. Looking around the room, desperate to distract himself with something, anything, his search failed for the 20th time. The room was fairly ample and a complete waste of space. At least in his opinion it was. He'd never even heard about ceremony rooms before. A room with the sole purpose of holding small ceremonies aboard ships, apparently. The funeral ceremony, though, he could understand and appreciate it. The names of the fallen crew members were engraved on a small metal sheet and preserved with their remains, if there was anything left to recover in cryostasis, until their bodies could be returned to their families, or, as was most often the case, just the metal plaque. Giving up on finding anything worthwhile in the largely featureless room, he turned his gaze to Jincho, finding some ruffled feathers and slightly wobbly eyes. "You didn't sleep?" he asked in a hushed tone, recognizing the signs and symptoms of sleep deprivation on a Yukanti. "Sleep is for weak," Jincho replied, his middle eye turning up to see him. "Working on recovered fighter remains. Over-engineered piece of scrap. Ugly. Powerful, but ugly. So ugly. Yet genius. Can learn much from it," he replied, blinking slowly. "If you say so," Wyatt replied, just in time to see Fabian Deshire receive a feather-shaped medal on his chest. He saluted, and Redford returned the salute before walking off stage. Honestly, he could barely even hear the commander's voice anymore. "Technician Jincho," Redford called a few seconds later. The Akanti was knocked out of his stupor as he answered the summons, not bothering at all to even pretend to march up on stage. To everyone's surprise, Clara stood up and knelt before the thoroughly confused Akanti. She produced a medal from her dress and pinned it on Jincho's uniform. "Technician Jincho," Clara began as she stood up. "For your many contributions, I, Princess Clara Astor, hereby officially grant you the rank of head researcher, engineer, and master technician under my banner and protection." Wyatt turned to Leopold when he felt the scarred man gently bump his forearm. "Does that rank exist?" he asked in a hushed, confused, yet amused tone. "I have no idea," Wyatt replied sincerely. But as Jincho's boredom was obliterated, replaced with energetic chirping and enthusiastic tail wags, he was almost certain Clara had simply made it up for her own twisted motives. The Ikanti and newly promoted head researcher, engineer, and master technician jumped off the stage as he radiated smugness that would make any blue blood feel envious. Next, Leopold was summoned. But he didn't receive a promotion, only 2 medals. Not counting the medal everyone received marked as the Hastrung Campaign, or as it was being called, the Flow Bloom, as it depicted a beautiful explosion on a twisted flower stalk. Gregor received 4 medals and was promoted from ensign to sub-lieutenant. Noltar received 3 medals, 3 commendations, and was promoted from sub-lieutenant to second lieutenant, much to his apparent joy. Raquel received 4 medals, 2 commendations, and was promoted from ensign to sub-lieutenant, matching Gregor. Galt also received 2 medals, a commendation, and was promoted from ensign to first lieutenant. Still a far cry from his original rank, but it demonstrated that he was to be trusted. Finally, and much to his and Salazar's surprise, The man received a medal and was promoted to staff sergeant. Finally, after what felt like ages, his name, the last on the list no less, was called. Wyatt marched on stage, saluted the aged commander, and waited for him to speak. Lieutenant Wyatt Staples, for exceptional valor, courage, loyalty, and perseverance, you've been granted the Astorian Medal of Valor, the Medal of Unwavering Honor, the Medal of Relentless Loyalty, and the Raven's Heart for your daring capture of the gallant venture, Redford exclaimed, pinning each medal on his chest in order. 7 commendations of valor have been added to your record, as well as 2 veterancy marks and an ace mark, making you an official bronze ace, he said, turning to grab a medal depicting 3 stars made out of bronze and pinning it to his chest alongside the other medals. Furthermore, Redford continued just as Wyatt was about to salute, thinking it was over. By royal decree sent by the prince himself, a collective gasp was heard as Redford picked up a datapad. In recognition of your outstanding acts of valor and loyalty to House Astor, the Astorian Principality. In recognition of vanquishing dreaded enemies of the Astorian Principality. In recognition of deeds that exceed expectations. I, the Prince, hereby promote Lieutenant Wyatt Staples to Lieutenant Commodore. Wyatt felt lightheaded but managed to remain strong at the revelation. A quick, confused glance at Clara told him she already knew. Of course she did, he thought, unamused. In response, the princess merely gave him an innocent smile. Furthermore, Wyatt felt his heart skip a beat as he heard Redford continue with a slight tone of amusement in his usual stern voice. Knight Banneret Wyatt Staples is hereby, by royal decree, promoted to Baron. May your future ventures be fruitful and prosperity befall your house, Baron Wyatt Staples. Wyatt felt darkness creep around the corners of his vision. His legs felt weak and he couldn't breathe. Through sheer force of will, even as blood left his face and brain, he saluted, unable to say anything. He stepped off the stage cautiously and slowly, sweating cold as he did so and rejoining his comrades. Redford gave a short closing speech and then dismissed them all. That was as far as he made it before darkness overtook him. Fortunately for him, Raquel and Leopold quickly acted to support his body just as consciousness left him, preventing him from falling to the ground. "You're absolutely right, Baron Staples," Leopold cried out. "We should celebrate." Following along with his theatrics, Noltar listed several meals they could enjoy, guiding the group while Gregor moved behind Wyatt, blocking the view. Raquel and Leopold worked together to carry Wyatt's unconscious self as quickly and naturally as they could manage it. For her part, Clara was thoroughly amused while Cynthia and Redford gave her disapproving looks. It did nothing to sour her pleasant mood. Black Ship fans, we now have a Discord channel where you can discuss the Black Ship with other fans. The Discord link is in the description and also on a pinned comment on this post. I look forward to seeing you there.